Okay. So, um, so welcome everyone. Thanks for coming. And to those who are watching the replay, thanks for watching. My name is Carol, and I will be facilitating today's Witchy Summit, Intro to Witchy Summit, which hopefully will be a bit of a series of intro to witchy topics. The first of which is today's topic, Witch. That I'm hoping will challenge certain assumptions that folks may have about the prevalence and diversity of witchcraft today. Let me let people in still. Okay. So I have a little presentation that I'll be sharing with you all. I'm going to do that now. Let me get that up here. So are you, looks like you're able to see the whole thing instead of the, just the, oh, here we go. Here we go. Okay. So I'm going to start out with talking just a little bit about myself and the learning grove that I'm wanting to start. I have been interested in religion and spirituality since I was a kid. I was really kind of a nerd about it and would read just about everything I could get my hands on. I grew up a Catholic and was very invested in that when I was really young, and actually thought I might want to be a nun until I learned more about what Catholicism did to the Native Americans, and that really disgusted me, and I just stopped being interested in Catholicism after that, but always kind of kept connected to Mary. And I really love the ritual mass, so it's hard for me to sometimes let that go. But anyway, I studied a wide variety of different religious and spiritual pathways, and especially alternative pathways, including a lot of Asian, in particular Taoism. And then I also even took a couple formal religious courses in college. I did some dabbling in paganism and witchcraft for a little bit in my teens, and then again later on in my 20s. And then I kind of stopped doing all of that because of life happening, and took a super long break from that until about 3 years ago. I started back into learning and practicing a pretty eclectic but self-structured pagan pathway that includes some elements of witchcraft. So my intention for the Drumlin Pagan Learning Grove is to construct a well-organized, curated, and limited set of resources and tools for pagans and/or witches who may or may not be new to this pathway. I'm sure that you are all familiar with going down rabbit holes around things of interest to you online, and maybe feeling frustrated at how much information is out there and how overwhelming that can be. And so I feel like for paganism and witchcraft, there's just so much information out there for new people to try to figure out what is actually real, what's reliable information in that area. And so I'm really hoping that this learning grove is going to be really helpful in that respect. So I do have a very strong background in adult education and research, and have facilitated learning communities online on and off for about 8 years. So I'm hoping this community will, this learning community or learning grove will take advantage of my skills and my strengths through the learning grove. All right, I think I want to try to see if there's more people coming. So let me just check that quick. Sorry. Stop share. All right. So I'm gonna share another slide quick. I just have one more slide, and then I'm gonna open it up for I'll start getting into the questions for the panelists, because I want to share a little bit about the prevalence of witchcraft and like large map of the different witchcraft traditions. So let me share that with you now. Just gotta get back to that here. All right. So I took a bit of time doing this, and this is kind of a like broad overview of many different traditions within the witchcraft pathways around the world. And in terms of a prevalence of witchcraft, according to my research online about this, Pew Research Center study in 2014 in the US alone, there was between 1 million and 1.5 million individuals that self-identified as pagan or Wiccan. And they didn't break down witchcraft into different pathways like you see on the screen. They just lumped it all together into Wiccan, which is always interesting. And according to a survey of religions from 2021 by the Office of National Statistics in the UK, there were about 127,000 pagans, witches, Wiccans, and other pagan adjacent folk in the UK. However, as you can see from this diagram, there are many, many more traditions of witchcraft. And I am also going to be going over some bits of information from this map and resources in between the panelist questions for the ones we don't have panelists for. That's just going to be a few of those. This map will also be in the workbook that I'm preparing for you to look over more deeply. There are a few points I want to make from this, and then a couple of caveats. First, there seems to be two main threads from each larger region or country, and from those threads, there will be more varieties. So the two main threads are formal, ceremonial, traditional, and often initiatory, which often means that you have to have an in Somebody has to refer you, or you have to get permission to participate in that particular tradition, or some other kind of qualifying way of entry into that tradition. The other thread that I felt I see here is folk witchcraft and indigenous healers kind of are very similar, but not always similar depending on the tradition. And that includes what many would call shamanism, but shamanism is a very specific form or term that comes from the Evenki people of Siberia. So there is kind of a trend right now away from using shamanism to refer to those kind of practices in other traditions if they don't come from that particular tribe. Second, point I want to make, besides those threads, is that there is nothing for certain in any of this. Especially in the United States, there's a lot of blending of traditions happening, including with these two threads. But I would say also there's significant blending within all of the traditions and all of the regions and countries of many of these things, and that's called syncretism. I think I said that wrong. Anyway, the third point I want to make about this is, while this shows how common it is for various cultures to blend different practices together, this doesn't give others outside of those cultures the right to indiscriminately take what they like without learning about those cultures first and developing some sort of relationship of reciprocity with them. And I feel pretty strongly about cultural appropriation, and I feel like it's very common in paganism in general. You know, but like I said, there's nothing for certain about any of this. And for example, when I mentioned tradition in the above two threads, it's important to note that folk witchcraft is also traditional, but not in the same sense of how many witches would perceive as traditional with a capital T. So, excuse me. Many people would find that particular, you know, capital T traditional as being more like a ceremonial, formal, traditional meaning. So that's just from my research, and there's many people that would probably say differently. A lot of the information that I've gotten for this presentation, and a lot of it was from online, but also from this new book by Thorin Mooney called Witches Among Us, and then also Laura Tempest Zakroff, Weave the Liminal. And then I guess the one certain thing that I would say actually is from Zakroff's book is that no one culture owns the real estate that is witchcraft. They all have it in one form or another. So that's a direct quote from that book. And some practitioners or indigenous healers may not even use their version of the word witch to describe what they do. Okay, so let's get on to the panelists, and I'm going to shut this down now. Let me get back to the sharing. Oh, let me let that person in. All right. All right. still showing on my screen here. So can you still see the presentation, or are you seeing Sherry?
No, we're not seeing the screen anymore.
What's that?
We're not seeing your screen anymore.
Okay, great. Thank you.
Mhm.
All right. So I'd like for us to have you all do introductions to the group. And I did give you all the panelists the questions that that I'd like you to use to kind of guide your witchy story and telling your kind of witchy story from those questions. So like, how did you become a witch? What kind of witch are you? Blah, 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 blah. So let's start with Jessica.
Hello, can you hear me? I'm going to take my glasses back off because even though I need them to see, I feel weird talking with them on. So, hi, welcome. I'm Jessica. Thank you, Carol, for inviting me on the panel. I'm a Welsh witch from Wales, in my native homeland of Wales. I'm just going to have a quick look at the prompts you gave us because there was quite a lot there. I think on your flow chart, I would probably put myself more in the Indigenous healer category for my particular place where I come from. In Wales, the Welsh word for witch is gwrach. And I would never say that I was a gwrach, because that is not a very complimentary word. So I have adopted the word witch now in later life, mainly because that is what other people understand what I do as. I do shy away from like using shamanism for the reasons that Carol explained already. I suppose I should go back to the beginning a little bit and talk about how I started on this path. I don't ever remember there being a time where I didn't know that this was what I do and who I am. I've done this over many lifetimes, and I can remember being, I don't know, about 3 or 4 years old and reading some picture books with my mum, which was they were kind of like funny books about Meg and Mog, and Meg is like a kind of stereotypical witch with a black hat and everything, which originally I think came from the Welsh traditions of black traditional dress here in Wales. And I just kind of knew, like from watching that, I was like, oh, okay, so that's who I am. I already knew at that point then that was like how I saw the world as well, kind of aligned with that. I think you said about talking about how you came to be a witch. I suppose, like I say, I feel like I didn't really come to it as much as just was. It's kind of something that's just been in me from the beginning. I know that's not everyone's experience though, and I don't think that that's any more valuable than people who come to this path. Although I do kind of think that people come to the path because they already are witches rather than discovering, I suppose, later on. But yeah, I don't know. There's lots of different ways in, aren't there? What kind of witch am I? That's hard to say. Like I say, I probably wouldn't choose to use the word witch if that wasn't what had come to be understood as what I do now. I mainly do focus on like working with people in a healing capacity, but my main understanding of what a witch does and what witchcraft is, both of those words are kind of problematic, is that it brings us into proper relationship, right relationship with the world. So I do kind of see myself, I'm definitely animist, as my ancestors here in Wales would have been. And I see our human responsibility as being in relationship with the world and not in the sort of relationship that has happened now with patriarchy and with colonialism and things like that, where our relationship now is one of where we take things from the world, and that's not right. And that's why things are kind of going to hell in a handbasket at the moment. So yeah, I see my role as witch as a mediator between the spirit world, the plant world, the animals around, all of that kind of thing. And I think that's like our birthright as humans, like all humans have that. But I do think there is certain of us who are called onto this path to be more of a kind of like a community leader, I suppose, in those particular things, like we find in indigenous communities all over the world. So So yeah, I think hopefully that's an answer for that question. I don't have a story about claiming the name witch, apart from just it's more convenient because people tend to know what that means now. So it's just a good way of doing that. It wasn't something that I felt really strongly over. Apart from, like you do get a bit of, like I said, I wouldn't use grach, and you do get a bit of pushback. Like they say, where do you find a witch? And it's like at the end of a pointed finger. It's usually a term that is applied to people from the outside, but I don't mind claiming a little bit of underdog against the system kind of feels anyway. So yeah, I think that is me. I think Carol had me down as like eclectic, which is definitely true because over my path, I'm in my mid-40s now, and I started practicing properly, I suppose, when I like in the early 90s when I was a teenager. And since then, I've kind of looked into, researched a lot of different things. I've dabbled in ceremonial magic and traditional witchcraft, folk magic, and yeah, even like Carol was saying, into some sort of Eastern practices and things as well, especially my early 20s. But where I've kind of come back to now is a more it's very embedded in the land, my practice. So I like to be connected with where I am and the land spirits here. But also I work a lot with astrology as well. I'm working with like the seasons and the cycles, and that's a really big part of my practice. I don't see witchcraft as being like something that is like a thing that we do. It's more about like a way of living in relationship with everything, with all that is. Thank you.
Right. Thank you so much, Jessica. All right, I have Michelle up next.
Oh, well, that's hard to follow, isn't it? I'm Michelle. I practice in the Dixie South of the US, and um, I guess I would consider myself an eclectic American folk witch. I think a lot of, unless you're part of a specific tradition here, there's a lot of piecemealing when it comes to Americans, and obviously a lot of Wiccan influence from the early days here. But where I'm located, I'm adjacent to the Appalachian Mountains, and so a decent amount of my practice is influenced by that culture and my connection to it. As Jessica said, I feel deeply connected to the land here. Anytime I travel abroad, I come back and it is just a balm to my soul to be on this earth here where I am located. I've lived my whole life here. And so I feel a deep connection to that. I think that's how I got started. I had dabbled as a teenager, as most, I think, in this community find it. I grew up in a very conservative Christian home, and so that was not really something that was safe to do. So I was very secreted in my exploration at that time. And then over the years, I've come back to it and back and forth. As I think most people know in the current climate, there's a lot of influence here that makes it kind of challenging to claim the word witch. It's very unsafe in certain places where that is a very controversial thing. So I use it among other practitioners where there is safety and we understand what that word can mean in a positive way. But I do not describe myself with that out and about in the world. But I would say that a lot of my practice is, as Jessica mentioned, rooted in the land, my connection to it, the plants and wildlife where I live. And probably the last 4.5 or 5 years, I've been dedicated to this path. And I explore the Celtic pantheon. That's also where my ancestors geographically came from, but I'm rooted here in Appalachia. So my practice is very blended and intuitive. I go with what feels right, and I try my best to respect the places and people who live these traditions in the modern world now. So I learn with respect and reverence from them. I think that sums up your questions. If I missed something, let me know.
Thanks, Michelle. All right, Julia.
Hi, everyone. I'm Julia. I'm from Germany. So my witchy stories really came about as a confluence of several interests that I have. When I was in my late 30s, because I've always been an environmentalist here in Germany, the environmentalist movement has been very strong. And when I was 19, I moved to the UK. I lived for 18 years in the UK, and I was very aware of Druidry and Wicca in the UK, and I was interested in that, but I never got around to look into it because I was very busy with work and social life and a lot of other hobbies. But I started to celebrate the solstices because I was aware, and the equinoxes, because I was aware that people did that at Stonehenge. There was always articles in the press about that. And it made sense to me because when I was working in London, in winter, you would go to work in the pitch black and you'd come out of the office and it was pitch black again. And it really did my head in. So I really felt the solstice as a bigger necessity to celebrate. The winter solstice was the first one I celebrated, then Christmas or anything else. And when I moved back to Germany and I had a child, I started to think, how can I involve my child in that? Because I read parenting books that said, if you have specific family rituals, it's actually, it makes families and children bond a lot more. I mean, we all know if you're in the Christian world, let's say, you all know how different people talk about their specific Christmas family traditions. But that Christmas is not a good thing to build a tradition in the sense that they look at it in parenting, because it comes with so much commercialism and everybody does it when you're in the Western world. I mean, around here, even the Muslims do it because you cannot not do it when you've got children. And so I wanted to do something more around the solstices because I knew nobody else here was celebrating that. And so I started looking into how can I involve my child into that. And I ended up on the website Learn Religions. And that, of course, explains paganism, Wicca, witchcraft, whatever you want to use. And I went down the rabbit hole and I realized that this actually is completely in line with a lot of things that I believed anyway, and with environmentalism. I am an animist. When people ask me to explain that to them, I tell them to look up James Lovelock's Gaia theory, because that kind of describes a lot what I believe, which leads me on how do I define witchcraft. For me, it's really the common belief of the sacredness of nature, the belief that the divine is immanent in us and in nature, and we are interconnected, and that we all have the agency to effect change by connecting to nature, by connecting to the elements, to raise energy and then direct it to effect change. And that is something that a lot of pagans, neo-pagans, druids, a lot of traditions have in common. And what makes me claim the word witch is really wanting to claim the word witch in a historical sense, to connect to history, but also from a feminist perspective. In terms of history, I don't believe in witchcraft as coming through a tradition from pre-Christian times. I take more the idea that we are influenced through occultists in England and Wicca. Personally, I don't think there's a direct lineage through pre-Christian times, at least not in Germany. But I think most people that I know who are somehow in witchcraft, they know what it feels like to be othered, to be bullied, to be pushed out by a group. And that's exactly what happened to historic witches. To be blamed for things that you haven't caught, people gang up on you. It's not a surprise to me that I meet a lot of neurodivergent people in witchcraft, because they will have been othered at some point in their life. Or most likely have been othered at some point in their life. And so using the word witch is a way of embracing that. Yes, I am different. Yes, I have experienced that. And I think that if I was still living in medieval terms, probably people would think I'm the kind of person to burn on a stake, because it winds them up that I often have different opinions and that I live a little bit different, I parent a bit different. It winds people up. Luckily, we live in a democracy and they can't do that to me. But that's the connection. And then, of course, the feminist thing, that today, when people get called a witch, it tends to be women. Historically, it tended to be mostly women, but today, especially, like when somebody wants to insult somebody, they call them a witch or a bitch, right? As you know, there's this whole feminist movement in the 70s that it started, that we can reclaim that, and I really believe in that. And for me, those are the differences to other animist or pagan streams. And in a way, witchcraft, we can talk about it as a religion. I prefer to say it's a philosophy or a way of life, because when people think religion, they think organization, as we have in the Abrahamic religions, or in Buddhism even, there's more organization behind it. And it focuses more on the beliefs, whereas in witchcraft, we have a lot of different beliefs. People come at it with their actual spirituality from a different angle, but I think the full philosophy of being a part of nature, of living with nature, and the ability to direct our will to effect change, it's more a way of life. It's more philosophy than a sort of sense of organized religion.
Thank you, Julia. All right, I have Root up next.
Hi, everyone. So I'm Root Holden, and I am an initiate in the reclaiming tradition. I'll talk about how I got there. And I also work within Druidry and some Norse spiritual practices as well. So eclectic, I think, is kind of the term for it, because it's I hear so many pieces, and everybody's sort of like, oh yeah, me too. Oh yeah, me too. And so it's fantastic. I also came up Catholic, and so I have a deeply ingrained love of like ritual and tradition, and incense. Like I still like that church incense is still like such a trigger for my brain of like, oh, um, yes, very nostalgic. Um, so I'm originally from West Virginia, so hello, Kentucky. That's where part of my people are from. So I grew up in Appalachia, and my mom is a Polish immigrant. They came over after World War II. She was only like 2 years old at the time, and so a lot of my spirituality is woven through like Polish Catholicism, which is what I jokingly call like Catholic plus. So they were very Catholic, but then there was also stories of like after someone would die, they would like come visit my grandmother, and she would dream about them, and they'd kind of like poke their head through, the ceiling to let her know that they were okay. And there were lots of little folk remedies of like, oh, if somebody is like super depressed or has something going on that's unexpected, it's like, oh, maybe they got the evil eye on them. And so you would do certain things, like you would turn your underwear inside out, or you would turn your coat. I know in Wales too, you turn your coat inside out to like, to distract or to confuse the fae. So there's a lot of little pieces like that that are woven through, I think, a lot of European traditions. And so it's one of those things where it's like, I don't know if grandma heard that from someone else and she was like, yes, and now in my brain, that's part of Polish tradition, or if that is actually something that came to her through like her lineage too. But they were very like, yeah, of the Abrahamic religions, but also the extra, mom was also very into like Sylvia Brown and like psychics and things like that. So I feel like growing up, even though I was in a very conservative area in West Virginia, and I went to Catholic school, went to church every Sunday, I had a lot of freedom to explore. My parents were, teenagers and like in their early 20s in like the 60s and 70s. And so when I looked at a bookshelf in my house, like there was no limits about what I could read, like if it was age appropriate or not, was the only thing. But it's, I'm looking at shelves that had like the three pillars of Zen and the Dhammapada and, books about Taoism and like, all of these things that were available to me as a child and as a like young teen. without limitation around it. It was like my parents both still identified as Catholic, but they were expansive in what their kids believed in. When I think it's like in ninth grade when you decide to be confirmed or when you go for confirmation in Catholicism, and I kind of had my moment of like, I don't think this is quite for me. And at the time, I was still presenting female, and so I was very like, I was a little girl who was seeing like I wasn't allowed to be an altar boy, which I was just like, I want to be up there. I want to ring the bells. I want to be part of the tradition. I was always like in the choir and did singing and did reading when I could. I always wanted to be involved, but I was always upset that like there were things I couldn't do just because of my gender, which I found ridiculous, even as like a little kid. And so between that and seeing the power dynamics, we had nuns that ran the school and then the priests that ran the church, and seeing the power dynamics between the nuns and the priests, like um, we would have a church on Wednesdays, where it's like the entire school would go. And sometimes the nun who was running our school would like do the mass if the priest wasn't available. But there was, she couldn't read the gospel, or she couldn't do a couple of things. Like she couldn't bless the Eucharist, she couldn't do like certain pieces. And I was just like, why? Because she's amazing, why shouldn't she be allowed to do that? So I went exploring to find something else. And I came to witchcraft actually through a science project. A couple of friends and I were doing a project together in eighth grade. And it was, lots of people were doing things about plants or whatever. And we decided to do one about ESP. And we had this like ESP testing kit, and it was the one where you have like the the cards with the shapes, and a set of dice. And there was one more test, I don't remember what it was, but we got permission to send home permission slips to all 500 kids in the school to test them for ESP skills. And we're just like three little eighth graders, and like for a Catholic school to allow this, like looking back, I'm just like, I can't believe they let us do that. Um, but we did. So we tested kids across the entire school and did like comparisons of like, if there were siblings in different grades and things like that. And I remember there was like one little girl that came in, and her mom had written on her permission slip that she did notice her daughter like maybe having some skill in this area, like knowing things she shouldn't necessarily know or things like that. And so she wanted to know like what her results were, which I was just like, oh, like this is the first time an adult externally had been like, oh, actually, maybe this is a real thing. It was so exciting. Um, so that really put me on the path because one of our resources was Buckland's Book of Witchcraft, the big blue book, and because there was information about psychics and things like that in there, and that was really what sort of blew the door off the hinges for me in terms of witchcraft. Um, so fast forwarding, through like getting the books, reading, Silver Ravenwolf and Scott Cunningham and the books that I could find at my little local crystal shop. I moved to California to go to college and found the reclaiming tradition. And it's people that had been practicing for, since like the 80s and had like regular classes and traditions and rituals and things like that. And I'll talk about that more when we get to the specific topics. But I really found a home in that tradition because um, it brought in a lot of the activist values that I have and the political values I have with action through witchcraft. Um, and I just found that to be really, yeah, just really the right place for me at that time in my life. So, just looking through what kind of witch are you? Honestly, kind of similar to what other folks are saying. Definitely animist. Like, I was getting a tattoo, and my tattoo artist was heathen, and he was talking about the personality of his different tattoo machines. And I was like, "Oh, you're an animist too?" And he's like, "Yeah, of course. Like, the different machines. Like, there's days where I can't use this one. It's just because it's cranky. There's nothing wrong with it, but it just doesn't feel right." And I'm like, "I get that. I get that." It's like when you go into a house and you feel the feeling of the house, and you're just like, "Oh, it feels like really cozy here," or "Oh, wow, like what what happened here? This feels weird." Um, how do I define witchcraft? For me, I go back to the definition of witchcraft is uh, changing consciousness at will. And I really feel that while we can have external effects with the work that we do, the most important effect we have is on ourselves, and in improving ourselves and improving our connection with the world around us. And I don't really have a story about reclaiming the name witch. It just sort of came with the tradition I was in. Like I was like dressing up as a witch, for Halloween and stuff. And then it's like slowly the Halloween decorations like stayed year round. Like even looking around my office, like if I took everything out of my office and put it on the front of the house, it'd be like, it'd be pretty good. It'd be a pretty good set of decoration. Uh, I think the witch piece, though, there's a lot of people in my tradition that call themselves priestess, which I also appreciate because it is that work with the goddess or the deities or whatever you identify with. For me, I tend to use the word witch because it doesn't necessarily associate you with working with deity, because that's not always where I'm at. I tend to fluctuate a lot in my beliefs, because I'm a plural person. I have dissociative identity disorder. So I actually have many selves within one body that all just sort of like ride share all the time. And different people have different beliefs. And so which is the one that we've like all agreed on is like, okay, that's cool. Like we all fit in that one. So yeah, so I'll stop there. Thank you.
Thank you. All right, Sherry.
Me?
Yep.
My name is Sherry. I go by Moonbeams. I got my name. In my mid to late 20s, when I was exploring shamanism with some Native American friends, and because I liked to dance outside and the moon was just all silvery and everything. It just made me feel so good. I am a druid. I identify as a druid, but I do have a lot of witchy tendencies. How I came to this path was I grew up in Middle Tennessee. Hey, y'all. Y'all know what I'm talking about. I'm in the heart of the Bible Belt. I attended the church. My mother attended the Church of Christ when she attended church. My father did not believe in organized religion at all. And so I was kind of in and out of it. And when I was a teenager, I had a lot of friends who were in that church. And so I attended regularly, except after the first school dance that my school ever had, because they don't dance. And my parents were actually chaperones, so it was condoned for me. But I felt like I was being verbally stoned, and I left the Sunday school class, went to my mom in the church area, and slid in the pew and said, "I'm leaving. We need to talk when I get home from work." And I told her what happened, and I said, "I'm not going back." And she says, "That's your choice. You're old enough to make that choice." And that was the choice. And I didn't really do a lot of exploration, but my dad's mother, I look back on what she did, was a hedge witch. She made poultices when we lived in a very rural area. So when someone was like really sick, she made like poultices for pneumonia or croup. And she went into the forest and she gathered, leaves and plants, and she always made us seasonal tonics. And so, she practiced a form of witchcraft, even though she probably would not have called it that. And her sisters did too. So I'm sure that her mother probably did as well. But I was like in my 40s when I figured that out. but I did a lot of exploration when I was in college. So I dabbled in shamanism. I dabbled in some other world religions, trying to figure out what I was, until in my 30s, I was reading a book and it talked about Druidry. And then I started doing some other research. And, you know, that's when the World Wide Web was really coming out then. So I could really get on and find stuff. And I went, this is what I am. And I did some studies. I'm a Druid in the Obad. Well, I was trained in the Obad tradition, but I've taken classes with AOD and a lot of different things. So I'm a kind of a eclectic Druid too, but I also have practiced witchcraft before I became a Druid. And I am kind of a eclectic. I believe in animism. Everything has a soul and a personality. And even as a child, I knew that. You know, I knew that the willow tree in my front yard, I could feel the heartbeat when I sat there. But I do practice astrology and divination, and I live by the lunar cycles. So that is my story of how I came to incorporate. I'm a Druid witch or a witch Druid.
Great. Thank you so much, Sherry. All right, I was gonna, since I seem to be having trouble with my presentation, I'm not like showing up as a full screen thing. I'm just gonna talk a little bit about, so I'm not gonna share that presentation anymore. It's, you know, it's just placeholders for reminders anyway. But I'd like to share a little bit about what I've learned about Asian witchcraft. There are several different traditions of witchcraft in Asian countries, and they are all kind of rooted from the main traditions in those Asian countries, like Taoism, Buddhism, Hinduism, but there are many other varieties that are more based on like the folk magic of the different regions in those countries. But many years ago, I was consumed by Taoist studies, so I did learn about some witchcraft practices then from that tradition, but I've since forgotten that. So at any rate, I can highly recommend Benny Bell Wen's videos on YouTube on Taoist witchcraft. She also has some on Buddhist witchcraft as well, if you're interested in that. I will have some more resources for some of these different traditions in the workbook that I'm creating as well for this. All right, so we're going to go on to the next set of questions, and some of you may have already answered some of these in your introduction, which is totally fine. You can share about something else related to your practice or your belief system is what this next set of questions is about. Is witchcraft your religion? Do you believe in deity or spirits? What are your beliefs? And if you have a brief story about a holiday that you celebrate, and if you have children, how you include them. So we'll start again with Jessica.
Am I going to go first each time? That's that's
Sorry.
daunting. So yeah, I mean, there's a lot in this question, isn't there? A lot of different parts of the question. So let's, I suppose, answer the easier ones first. Is witchcraft my religion? No, I don't no. For me, witchcraft is very much a practice. Like the word witchcraft has come to kind of describe well, it describes a whole gamut of things, doesn't it? But it has come to describe a certain way of kind of like relating with the world, and that kind of like what some people would call like magical thinking that they say only children and savages kind of have, where we believe that we can bring change into the world. But anyone who has practiced it knows that you can. So the joke's on them, really. So we are, I don't see that as being a religion, because it is something that is just like very natural for all humans to do that. So I think that it's not a religion, because like religion, the root of that has rules as part of like religion. It comes from religio, from the Latin, and that's like to do with rules. And I suppose it's a rule in terms of like universal law that humans can interact with the world in that way. And I feel like we should interact with the world in that way, but it's definitely not a religion in the way that we tend to understand that now, for me anyway. But I very much do believe in deity and in spirits, because they're real. And so I have a very deep relationship. I think one of the questions was what are your beliefs? And that could be like a couple of hour long questions. So I'll try and I'll try and kind of keep it compact. But my belief is that the universe is kind of like a coherent living thing, and that we are all it's like that whole idea of fractals, where like each tiny little part of the thing is a representation of like the whole thing, and the whole thing is like a sum of all the tiny little parts. So it's like works on both like a macro and a micro level. And so deities, like as we understand them, like personified deity, to me are like kind of fractal parts of that whole idea of divinity and how we can kind of relate with that. And then individual spirits, like kind of like land spirits or tree spirits, things like that, have very individual characters as far as like what the actual spirit is, like who the actual spirit is. But again, I still see them as being like kind of each individual tree spirit has got its own personality, but is also like part of that greater kind of category that is tree spirit. And like as humans, we're kind of the same as that. Like we've all got our own individual personalities, but we're also all part of that kind of bigger category that is human. So yeah, I mean, that is a really large question. So hopefully that's just like a little bit of my thinking about it. It's something that I come back to a lot and think about a lot. And my daughter, she's 14, and she's starting to ask a lot of these kind of really good questions now about like how do you think this works and why? And she's obviously forming her own kind of beliefs around these things at the moment. So yeah, it's something that I enjoy thinking about. I like reading about, kind of hearing different perspectives, because you know, like that feeling when you read something and you're just like, yes, that's true, you know, you can kind of just feel the truth of it. And then I read other things, I'm like, that's not quite it, you know. And I love that kind of feeling of like resonance, that kind of ping you get when you're like, that's what I believe, that's kind of true for me. So I try and always keep that as like a kind of guiding framework for me when I'm exploring these kind of ideas. Share a brief story of a holiday I celebrate, and if I have children. So I do have children. I've got 2 children, an 11-year-old and a 14-year-old. And I don't like holidays are slightly problematic for me. I think as like being Welsh and in one of like in Celtic culture, I mean, there's so many problems with the whole term Celtic anyway. But being like from a Celtic culture, that is one of the cultures that is kind of being appropriated in general for the kind of like main body of a lot of the witchcraft stuff that we get in the West. So I have a kind of weird relationship with the like Wheel of the Year kind of holidays, because many of them are appropriated really and have kind of been like pulled out of context and given names by people who didn't really know what they're talking about and things like that. So it's multi-layered. I suppose with my children, I tend to just celebrate. But I suppose for me, I do celebrate the wheel as in each season. And I don't know if celebrate is really the right answer, the right kind of way of describing it. Is I feel like what I'm doing is I'm both spinning the wheel by the activities that I do in my local area, by observing, by noticing, but also by kind of learning from the changes that are happening in nature. so I'm kind of like driving the wheel, but also being driven by the wheel. It's kind of like a symbiotic relationship like that as we're moving around. So I do definitely observe the wheel and the seasons, and like the smaller cycles, like the lunar cycles and things like that as well. But as far as like the bigger, like the kind of the Sabbath holidays, I don't observe any of them in any kind of traditional way. I do have some like personal things I do like around Imbolc, because there's a strong kind of like Mary, Virgin Mary kind of theme in my practice. I do celebrate like Candlemas really, and dedicate candles on that day. Ask Mary to bless my candles on that day. And with my children, like I'm very solitary in my practice, and it's kind of like personal to me. So I don't tend to involve them that much in the things I'm doing. Like I definitely do talk to them about it, and like they know, and they don't find it strange, you know, that we do certain things, or maybe like visit certain places at certain times of the year and things like that. But I don't do like a feast day kind of thing for the different holidays, though, because like in Wales, we do celebrate Christmas, we do celebrate Easter, we do celebrate Halloween or Nos Galan Gaeaf. I do mark the solstices like in a more personal way, and the equinoxes, but not like in the kind of traditional Wheel of the Year kind of way. So yeah, I've got this kind of like weird, I haven't quite settled. Like on my YouTube channel, I don't make the this is how you celebrate Litha kind of videos, because I just don't resonate with that. You know, it doesn't make sense to me, not in the way that people tend to make those kind of videos, really. I have a odd relationship with that. I feel like there's something else I wanted to say about that as well. About, oh yeah, but in recent years, I've become more aware of how useful having those like celebrations is for people who haven't got a land-based practice, I suppose, and that how that is like a way in for people. And also, I need to remember that other people are more sociable than me. So they like to have gatherings with other people like as they're going through the year. And it's not that I don't like gathering with other people, but like Julia said, I think a lot of people who are neurodivergent kind of come into the craft, and I'm autistic and also have combination ADHD, so I'm definitely in that category. But so like my kind of relationship with people, like I'm a bit socially awkward, so I don't tend to find those kind of like big or even like smallish, but like kind of gatherings like that useful, apart from if they have got like a kind of circle structure, like in our circle of kindreds, which Carol and a few other people are members of here, Julia and Michelle, in fact lots of you here are in the circle of kindreds. We do have like celebrations around different points of the Wheel of the Year, but they're not like a Mabon celebration or something like that, because that just doesn't resonate with me in that way. Yeah, but I appreciate that other people do enjoy that. So I don't want to like yuck anybody's yum with those, because I know, and it's fun. I like having structure in my life, so I can see why people are drawn into like having that Wheel of the Year as a thing. And I think maybe like in my crone years, perhaps I will get to a point where I've kind of like evolved my own wheel. But I think at the moment I'm kind of still like, my children are not really young now, but I'm still kind of like in the thick of flowing with all the things. Like Julie was saying about Christmas and stuff like that, we do Christmas, that's what everyone is doing that here. So it kind of just makes sense. We do all the Halloween kind of stuff that happens here because that makes sense, and I wouldn't want my children to kind of like miss out on those kind of things. But I do speak to them about what those times of year are, like what's happening in nature in those times of year, what's happening inside me those times of the year, and how that kind of relates into the stories that we have. Like when we talk about Christmas, we do talk about like the returning of the light, the returning of the sun, like the sun and the sun in both senses. So yeah, I feel like I kind of try and like weave it into the stuff that is already happening, but perhaps in the future I'll have a more like embedded practice with that, I guess. Yeah.
Thanks, Jessica. Michelle?
Okay. Yeah, so I'll go through the questions also. I think that'll help me stay on track. No, witchcraft is not my religion. I identify it as a practice for me, so it's more the how than the what or why even in what I do and how I've developed my practice. And I feel it's also an evolving thing. And like Jessica, the rules, structure, dogma, etc., that most of us identify with religion don't apply to my practice. And I actively challenge that within my own practice of like, am I beholden to these rituals I've created, and making sure that my practice stays aligned with who I am as a person? And so I try not to get locked into, this is how I practice, this is how I practice, and always make sure that the way I practice witchcraft and my paganism are truly my own. So I think in that way, that's what makes witchcraft a practice and not a religion, is that generally when people gather that are part of the same religion, there are those shared beliefs, rules, structure, etc. And within witchcraft, it's so diverse. And even within traditions and covens within, you know, the same initiated tradition, etc., it's so diverse with individual beliefs. And I love that. I love that exists. And so I feel really at home in those spaces of going into a group of multifaceted, multi-practice people and just getting to learn about them uniquely, just even through how they share their practice. And so I do work with deity, both goddess as a general concept of the divine, of source energy, and also with specific deities that kind of found me. We found each other. I don't know how to describe that. It's an evolving thing. And I try to stay really loose with it and just experience that as it happens. I think when I first came to the craft, my like in a really obvious way, I felt like goddess literally called to me. It was like a voice in the literally looking under the full moon through my telescope. But then I panicked because everything in my Judeo-Christian upbringing said, that's not how it's supposed to happen. And so I really spent about a year not working with the concept of deity at all. I was very much like, no, I need to figure out where I'm going with this before I commit to any additional beliefs or whatever. So sorting myself out was the first step. Which goes back to what Jessica said. I feel like it's so much about who we are and how we connect to the world, to all of creation, the universe, etc. So for me, I try not to get too stuck into labels. I oscillate between hard polytheism and soft polytheism all the time. And I like being in that ambiguous space. I try to be open to what that means for me as a person and as a spirit myself. I would say my beliefs are evolving. I generally believe that there is a unifying energy of the universe of all life. So in that way, I'm somewhat animistic, but I do again believe in unique deity. So it's kind of a mishmash for me, and I don't question it. I just go with it. But in that way, it has allowed me to be really open to some of the beautiful things that I did get and keep from my family of lineage. You know, some of the Appalachian and Southern beliefs that are Christian influenced, and I don't reject that off the cuff as long as it's based in openness and love and trust in goodness. And so in that way, I open myself to that in my practice. My beliefs also have to do a lot with connection. And so I really believe that part of my practice is to connect with others and give them a safe place where we can connect. And so I think that's a foundational part of my practice as well. About 2 years into really dedicating myself to the craft and to my paganism journey, I started a local group where we gather. There are witches and practitioners of the whole spectrum, and it's steadily grown. And I think that I don't call myself a priestess. There's none of that. There's no dogma. There's no tradition or anything. It's literally a safe place for people to come and share and connect in what we have in common. And so I think that's a core belief for me, is honoring, respecting, and seeing the oneness in us all. And so I would say that's a core belief for me. In terms of how I celebrate and with my kids, like Jessica said, I acknowledge the appropriative nature of the neo-pagan and Wiccan inspired Wheel of the Year, but I do use it as one, a common anchor that we all know and understand. Most neo-pagans and witches use that as an anchor for their seasons. So I use those terms because we all speak that language, but in terms of practice, it's very seasonal. Like, I recognize that it's a spectrum, even within the high days that we all acknowledge, that it's such a beautiful continuum. Like, even with autumn, this autumn has felt so different. And it's so interesting to see the interplay as I experience the land around me of summer coming into fall, going back again. Now we're headed into winter and back again. And in Kentucky and the Dixie South, that's very true. There is this fluidity of season. And so with a land-based practice, that's part of my beliefs, is that everything is a bit fluid, and there's not one hard line. And I think that's a foundational part of my seasonal practice. And with that said, I'm also in an interfaith, interracial, and intercultural relationship. And so my children experience that. We bring them up in understanding both the culture and beliefs of the culture we exist in right here in this place, of our ancestors, both mine and his, which are Asian American. So we have a beautiful mix of it all. We celebrate Lunar New Year, we celebrate some of the Irish holidays, we celebrate some of the Wheel of the Year, and we observe the equinoxes and solstices, just as, like, I feel all living organisms do. We're all impacted by it. So for me, it's an and, not an or it's and I think that too, I live on land that was colonized, and so I acknowledge that there are, in my connection to the land, there's a lot of respect for the way that it was changed by my ancestors. And so as I observe those practices here, I also try to do so with an understanding that some of what I do needs to be done in closed doors, not out among the land spirits, among the people who were harmed by my ancestors. So I don't always practice those things out in any kind of visible way, because I recognize that I come from a colonizer ancestry. And so for me, that's a really core part of my beliefs too, of not pushing it or claiming dominance.
Thanks, Michelle. All right, Julia. I think you talked a little bit about some of this in your when you shared before, but that's okay. You can share what you.
I went fluidly into it.
Yeah.
Yeah, my beliefs really are around, they're animistic, and I think we've said quite a few things about that. I am interested for historical reasons in anything I can find out about the pre-Christian faith here. And I love traveling, and wherever I travel, I look at the history of the place, the politics, the religion, the old religions. And so this summer we were in Ireland, and at the moment I'm reading a book with my daughter. It's a children's book about the stories around the Irish goddesses. But that's more like I wouldn't adopt any of them in my practice in terms of my spirituality. It's a historic thing that I'm interested in. And that moves me on to my daughter, really. I as I said, I try to involve her very early on, very deliberately, to have like something that's specific to us as a family. I'm a solo mom, so it's just me and her. And so around the Wheel of the Year holidays, we've always looked at, basically in Germany, people are very much paying attention to the seasons anyway. I think I spoke to someone from the States recently, and they asked me about Waldorf schools. And a lot of the Waldorf practices, they're part of normal nursery here. They always go out with the kids. They observe what's happening in nature. They talk about what's the seasonal food. They collect sticks, stones, God knows what the plants throw off, and make little displays in the nursery. You know, put a bit of magic on it and you've got a witchcraft art. And so I've done that with my child as well at home. We observe the seasons. We check what is in season in terms of the food. How can we make some food out of it? We make a nice meal together. We have some arts and crafts that are connected to that. What I used to do when she was younger is start at Samhain, which is a different connotation here. But I say Samhain because that's the word that everyone knows, right? I don't do it in a kind of Celtic way. But you know, that's the word that, you know, Wicca has given it. So that's what everyone knows in English. But anyway, we go out and we adopt a tree, like usually a hazelnut tree, because there are loads of them around, and you can see the buds are already there. When the trees lose their leaves, the buds are already there. So there's hope of the light returning. And then we check at Imbolc, where are they? And the hazel is one of the earliest flowering ones. So you can see the little female flowers. They're really, really small red and white bits, and you have to look very closely at your adopted hazelnut to see they are there. And then the male pollen, the catkins, they're called in English, yes. You can collect them, and it's the earliest very high protein nourishment for insects, and we can eat them. So we dip them in chocolate and we eat them, and then we check when are the first things coming out, when are the first leaves coming. So you observe your adopted hazel every week, you know, for at least a walk. And we used to do that the weekend because like it's really hard to get a 2 or 3 year old out of the house in winter when the weather is ugly. And that's a way, like we're going to go visit our hazelnut tree. In terms of ritual, like when we came into the pandemic, I started a group of people who were interested in meeting up and doing witchcraft rituals. And it was outside because here the rules weren't very strict. We were allowed to meet almost the whole throughout the pandemic. We were allowed to meet with several people outside. So we had outside rituals. And then my daughter, if she wanted to participate, if not, she would just play adjacent around, you know, it was always outside. That drifted apart because people, you know, as the pandemic was over, people got more interested in their usual business, hobbies, whatever. They were not that interested in witchcraft to stay in that whole thing. Like when I meet people, they just say, oh, shall we do another ritual? But when you actually say, okay, that, you know, when can we do it? What date? They're too busy. But my daughter's become organically more interested. So the main ritual part, she's more interested now in, and she likes to participate at home. Sometimes we do spells when she's got specific problems. We do a little spell around that. And that's really nice. Is there anything else?
Oh,
Yeah,
that sounds good. Thank you. Roy?
Yes. So we have 2 kids. We have a 14-year-old and a freshly turned 21-year-old just a couple of days ago. When they were younger, especially, so they were both basically kind of like raised alongside of us, knowing that we were pagan, and my partner and I have been together for about 7 years. So the kids, you know, kind of grew up separately until the last 7 years or so. But like when I was pregnant, my son would, you know, come with me because I couldn't really not come with me to like all of the classes I was going to and ritual and things like that. Um, he he came out a little atheist, which is adorable, but you know, it is what it is. His dad and I are very flexible in terms of our spirituality. Like his dad kind of doesn't really have any particular thing that he believes in, but he doesn't not believe in things. Like he's, you know, pretty open. And so we've really been able to give Will the space to just figure out what works for him, which is fantastic. And then our daughter is very pagan, you know, when her and she knows that I talk about her stories and stuff that I've been given permission to talk about. When she's away at college and when her cat died, she adopted a hospice cat that was already like 12 or 13 years old, and we knew that she was going to die probably within 6 months or so. And she adopted the cat knowing that because she wanted to give her a good home, for the last 6 months or so of her life. And once her cat died, she was like, okay, like I want to make an altar for my cat, and like, started like collecting like her collar and things like that. So I feel like our kids were really brought up. They're both animists. They actually both have autism as well. My son has ODHD, so autism and ADHD. Neurodivergence runs very solidly through our family. I am surrounded by autistic and ADHD loved ones, which I delight in because I'm like, you're fantastic. You're fantastic people that are very straightforward about everything that you need me to know. And so, yeah, it creates a really delightful household because like with even when it comes to like spiritual beliefs, like I always grew up with this is what we believe in and this is how we do it, and there was not really a why behind it. And the first thing my kids will ask me is, well, why do we do that? Well, why do we do it that way? And so there's always the questions because part of having that brain is you see holes in things, you see the gaps, you want the information. um and it's questions that it hadn't occurred to me to ask myself even, and so they'd ask me these questions and I'm like, oh, why do we do that? And so we have a similar feeling when it comes to sort of like holidays and traditions of like really assessing like why are we doing it? What does this serve? Is this for us? Is this just serving some nostalgia? And we do a mix. So we do. My partner is from Italy, or one of my partners is from Italy. The other one's from the UK, and so we have a very eclectic mix of holidays that we do. Like we do Easter, not because we're like, Jesus is great, but like not because we're about like Jesus and the rising and blah blah, but like because I grew up with Easter baskets and I loved it. And we also do La Befana, which is the Italian witch that comes and delivers little stuff in a stocking. Um, that also happens to coincide with a Catholic holiday. So we celebrate all sorts of stuff. Like honestly, we are just a family that really enjoys holidays. So it's like, aside from things like Thanksgiving, we're often like we'll celebrate the thing just for the fact that we want to celebrate it. Um, because it's like every day that ends in Y would be a holiday if we could make it be. To be perfectly honest. When it comes to like the Sabbats or specifically like the neo-pagan holidays, all of the things everybody has said. Super problematic. Yes, any excuse to have a little celebration is great for kids, and we love it too. We're like, I do this for you, but do I do this? But I also do this for you, even though you're away at college, because I love it too. And it's great because we've been able to bring up our kids. Like our kids don't have any holiday trauma, or birthday trauma or things like that, which a lot of people do have in their lives just because life has a lot of trauma that comes with it. And so it's very sweet to be able to give that to our kids of like being able to hold those spaces around the holidays, and really make it about them and make it about their experience, and also about me going to therapy and processing my own stuff around Halloween or whatever holidays I have issue with. So we are very aware of um, appropriation and trying to be careful about um, that sort of work. I've worked in a few different traditions. Like I worked with the Sisterhood of Avalon before I transitioned. They're fantastic people. And like they work specifically with Welsh deity and use the Welsh name for holidays. And I learned a lot more about the specifics of, that particular culture and that particular, and I don't want to say it as like a monolith because there no culture is a monolith, but I feel like there are ways that with the different traditions I've been a part of, I've been able to get a glimpse of, oh, actually, well, we call it Samhain and we do this, but it's actually everybody does something different and everybody does things through their own cultural lens, their own socioeconomic lens. There's so many layers when it comes to all of these practices. Um, one thing that we deal with a lot of because my partner is Italian and comes from a place that is particularly, people are talking about like the strega, tradition, not a thing also not a monolith. Shockingly, when you're the one involved in the culture, you see how other people try to make it a monolith, and it's just really not. You know, yes, Nana had her practice that she did when she was, doing this, to get rid of the evil eye. And this person over here may have done the same thing, or they may have done something completely different. And so we try to be very careful about that and make the practices our own. So, if we are making an ancestor altar, we're not buying Mexican like Dia de los Muertos decorations and things like that. Italy also has a Day of the Dead though, and so we're careful about making sure that we are focusing on um, I don't want to say just the traditions of our people, but making sure that if we are doing something, we are doing it in the appropriate context. Because that's actually something that descended through some of the religious traditions I've been a part of, is there is a lot of appropriation. And I'll say that there's no excuse for appropriation. Even if something was happening in the 70s, it was still appropriation. Like with like the Reclaiming Collective, and specifically like within Radical Fairy, like the Radical Fairies, there was a lot of, it was a countercultural movement, mostly among white gay men that were looking to bring sort of a queer consciousness into their own lives and have that lens when they're looking at spirituality as well, because they were rejected from the church. They were often rejected by their families. And so there was a lot of trauma and tremendous suffering there. And also their appropriation of like Native American practices, not appropriate, not an okay thing to do, because there's trauma on all sides. And just because something looks and feels good does not mean it's contextually appropriate for you to do. That's like when we hear about people dying because they tried to like do a sauna themselves, build their own sauna or build their own sweat. I just blanked out on the name of it. Doing sweats and things like that are medicinal. And it's like, well, it's not your practice. It's not appropriate. And because you didn't have that context, people are getting hurt. And whether it's physical hurt or emotional and spiritual hurt, it's still difficult. And so that's something we've really worked with our kids with too, of like, we don't just take this and use it because it sounds cool. We want to know the context and why it's happening and the cultural, historical value of it as well. Just rolling back a little bit, is witchcraft my religion? That is a great question. So one thing I didn't mention earlier is I'm actually in seminary. So I'm in seminary to be an interreligious chaplain. And I chose to go to a progressive Christian seminary because honestly, there are no like Wiccan or pagan seminaries in the US that you can get financial aid through. You have to be an accredited institution in order for students to get financial aid. And so the UCC, the United Church of Christ, is a very progressive Christian group. Most of us, I think there's about 200 students, half, if not all, are queer. Many of us are trans. Like if I look in a classroom of 20 people, half of us will be trans, which is a much higher, number than, sort of the average population. But that being aside, so there's a lot of pagans that go there because we're able to get the schooling that we need in order to go on and be chaplains or ministers or whatever. And one of the classes I'm taking this semester is called What is Religion? And it is literally a look across all of the different humanities and sciences, a snapshot of what each describes religion as. Fascinating. My favorite quote so far is that religion is any belief that functions as the most significant arbiter for decisions and actions, and any behaviors whose value is limited to the actor are religious beliefs and behaviors. So basically, if you're making decisions based on it, you're taking action based on it, and the value of what you do goes beyond just you, then it could technically be a religion, which is fascinating and very open. Because if you also think about things like people being really into sports, like if you're really into football, any belief that functions, blah blah blah, so there's definitely some work that Rita Gross could use to her definition for religion. But if I look at religion through that lens, then I would say yes, that my witchcraft practice, yeah, I can see that in the South for sure. Yes, there are many things, political parties, blah blah blah. Yeah, that's why this class is fascinating, because it's just slicing and dicing across all of the sciences, asking the same questions about religion. So I would say my witchcraft practice is my religion, and that is because the actions that I'm taking, the sort of community recognized behaviors that I'm doing. If I'm casting a circle, like 90% of witches know what that is, some might not. If I'm using a statue to represent something, people know what that symbolic action is for, what it's doing. Um, and I do feel like my behaviors are unlimited to myself. They are hopefully impacting the world around me, and potentially spirits and deities, um, if such things are out there or not. Um, I think it was Michelle that said that you kind of go back and forth between soft and hard polytheism. Same. One day, literally yesterday, we were trying to find my partner's passport and couldn't find it, so we went out and put, dairy out for the fairies because that's what you do. And then there are some days which hasn't come back yet, but we just put it out yesterday, so I have high hopes. But then there are other days where I look around and it's like we're in the middle of a ritual and everybody's singing and it's really ecstatic and beautiful, and there were and all that. And I look at her around for a moment and I am like, we are all crazy pants. Like, what are we even doing right now? But it works. The change is still happening. That energetic connection is still there. So even if, like, I don't necessarily believe in deity, there is some energetic something happening. And so again, it comes back to, like, what do I define deity as, for that question? So lots of very good, very loaded, but very delicious questions that you've asked in here, Carol, and I appreciate that. So I'm going to stop there for now.
Thank you. Moonbeams.
Sorry, I could not get myself unmuted. Is by practice my religion? Yes and no. Because I do maintain a strong spiritual practice, incorporating a couple of specific deities, as well as the creator. But do I worship them? No. So yes and no. In Druidism, we believe that everything is divine. Like, my pen is just as divine as an animal, and I have the divine in me as well. The whole world is divine, and that that also comes back to that animism part of my belief. And many Druids, but not all, do believe in animism. But my practice is very rooted in nature. So nature's my church, I guess you could say. And as far as holidays, some of us know that the wheel of the year is a recent manufactured practice from Gerald Gardner, who originated Wicca, and Ross Nichols, who broke Obod off from the World Order of Druids and started that function, and they were very good friends. However, it does give a really good way to celebrate the seasons and the equinoxes points of the year. Some of them I do celebrate, some of them I do not celebrate. But I do try to mark the seasons, because the seasons don't necessarily align with the will of the year. Some people's fall season celebration is going to be later or earlier, but I do try to mark those in some way. And I do rituals. The Obi practice is very strong on rituals, calling the direction, calling the quarters, and closing the circle and having your ritual. The ritual doesn't have to be prescribed, but it does have certain things that make it a ritual, and I do those periodically. But I also celebrate the full moons and the new moons. So, and that's something that we have not talked about, but I do live by the moon, the lunar cycles. So, but no, it's not it is and it isn't a religion for me. I would say 75% not and 25% yes. I also don't have children, but if I did, I would try to involve them in some way, not necessarily a ritual but a practice. So maybe at Yule, we would do maybe a spiral walk, or at Samhain we would light candles for our ancestors, or at say Alban Eiler, which is Astara, we would put something out for the bunnies so that they will be productive, or for the birds. But I would try to do something to help them mark those seasons as well. And that's all I have for that.
Thank you. All right. So we're getting pretty close to the end. So I'm gonna skip over some of the sections that I was gonna do, and I'm just gonna include some of that information in the workbook that I'm preparing. So that will include some of the traditions that we didn't get to here, that people didn't have a chance to talk about. So the next round of questions is, besides celebrating holidays, what do you do as a witch? And what are some of your practices? I guess that's the same question. What is your favorite tool and why? And we'll start with Jessica again. Thanks for being willing to go first every time.
I don't think you asked me. I'm just teasing Carol, it's fine. Okay, so my daily practice is I tend to prioritize like what I do on a daily, rather than like when I was talking about the Sabbaths being not so important to me. My daily practice is really important to me and like central really to everything that I do. So it's not super long, but I have altars for each day of the week. I work a lot with astrology. I'm an astrologer as well as being a witch, and that each of my altars is connected with those Ptolemaic planets, with the ones that are visible to our naked eye, which also correspond with the days of the week. So every morning, when I come down, I've got like the altars are all kind of in the same area. So I turn on my like altar lights that I've got around that area, and then I will light incense on the relevant day, which has got kind of like items on it associated with that day and with that planetary energy, but also with that kind of archetypal energy as well. I do say my version of the Charge of the Goddess, and then I use the like the planetary hymns, to kind of invoke the energy of each of the planets. I do also, I don't pray a whole rosary every day, but I'll do a few Hail Marys. I usually do a full rosary on a Friday. I don't do like the proper rosary practice as per the Catholic Church. And yeah, I think my rosary praying is a little bit eclectic in itself anyway. What else? Yeah, I've got like, I like to like read a little bit of something like from something inspirational then as well. Yeah, trying to think what like the pattern of my practice. I pull cards every day as well. So at the moment I've been using mainly Oracle decks, but I do like to pull cards as part of that. But all in all, it's that kind of like quiet morning time at my altar is like really central. And it takes about like 20 minutes or so. It's not like a huge amount of time, but it's just kind of quiet time. My children are home educated, so there's no like rush in the morning because they're not kind of having to get up from school or anything like that. So it's kind of like my peaceful time in the morning. And then the other thing that I think is like central to my practice is journaling. I love journaling. I've been journaling like since I've been 11 years old, like really consistently throughout my life. And that is one of the ways that I find like I kind of connect with myself, but also with my practice as well. I do a lot of like actual like magic inside my journal, like a lot of like kind of ritual, I suppose, for like kind of releasing things or invoking things within my journal. And also I've got a little dog, Frodo, who was scratching at the door, which is why I had to turn my video off for a little minute and try and bring him in again, because he's like gone in and out about 5 different times now, but he's back in now. And we go out every day, like rain or shine, for I won't say the WALK, and that is also a central part of my practice, because that I walk. I don't do exactly the same walk every day, but I do very similar walks. So like over the period of like a week, I will have walked all of the different ways that I tend to go, like visiting the kind of trees and things that are around this area, and the stream, and the mountains. So it's like, and you like obviously observing, then noticing all the different things that are happening in those as you go through the year, and watching those changes. And like, yeah, I think as Michelle was saying, how different each season is. Even like, it's like, yes, we're in autumn again now, but it's very different in feeling. Like there's still, the trees have still got loads of leaves left here at the moment, and it's being quite mild in general, but it is really dark. So yeah, those kind of things are really important to me. I do like I do quite often have like a ritual bath, and I do spellcraft. But those things are kind of like ad hoc more, whereas like it's my daily practice that is the kind of like the central, like the axis, I suppose, which around everything else kind of revolves around that. And a favorite tool, I don't really use tools that much. I suppose it depends what you define as a tool, I guess. I do like because my journal could be a tool, I guess. I do like to use divination, so I've got several tarot and oracle decks that I like to use. These things tend to multiply, don't they? I have got like I haven't got like the whole kind of like set of ritual tools, like as per like if I was in like a Wiccan tradition or like a traditionalist tradition or anything like that. I don't have those kind of tools in that sense. I tend to use things to do the jobs that I want them to do. So yeah, that's a tricky one to answer, but maybe I'll go with my journal.
Thank you. Michelle?
Yeah. Okay. I'll try to be brief, because in general, my practice is very maximalist. It's simple things, but a lot of them. So like Jessica, I tend to have a lot of daily rhythms that anchor my practice, and then I flex into a lot of other ones. So I would say my daily practice is time at my goddess altar. I have an ancestor altar where I make daily offerings. I do work with Goddess Bridget, so I have a Bridget altar that I spend time at every day, and that is a somewhat new relationship. So I try to incorporate at least one daily thing that allows me to understand her or goddess and Irish paganism, and what I can learn from my ancestors as well as living practitioners in that way. So that is a part of my practice. Learning Irish Gaelic, connecting with Irish practitioners now, and educating myself on this kind of, I don't know, it's very weird being an American in so many ways, but not least of which as a person who has always felt called to that, to Irish culture, to the Isles in general. Like I just feel that that's always been a part of who I am. And so I do have that altar space as a part of, you mentioned Laura Tempest Sackroff, like as she talks about of like, how does our lineage and our ancestors and the living traditions that we can learn from and be inspired by root us onto the land where we are. And so I spend a lot of time in my garden. I spend a lot of time out with the tree spirits that are on my property and tending to the birds and wildlife there. Like part of my daily practice is refilling the bird feeders, leaving offerings for the chipmunks and rabbits and raccoons and possums that come into my backyard, burying those who die here. I do think it is very indicative of having a witchcraft practice that lots of wildlife come to my yard to die. And that is also a part of my practice, is honoring the cycles of life and giving respect and honor to the beings that come here to spend their last time with me. So I would say in that way, there is a fair amount of Appalachian influence because in general, people here, even though there's a lot of Christian influence, there is a certain amount of reverence for the cycle of life, and death is not necessarily shied away from here, and nor is love and light type of spirituality, which is no dig to those who believe that, but there's a grittiness to my practice where I'm okay with being outside and getting my hands dirty at midnight and carrying connection with spirits as they cross through the veil and things like that. So that is a part of my practice that I honor. And I try to stay open to it because our culture doesn't acknowledge that and gets really weird about it. So that's a part of my practice. I also, like Jessica, I practice tarot, oracle, and other forms of divination. I do spirit work, both human and non-human spirit. I have regular spell practice, ritual, and that sort of thing. And I would say there's a fair amount of green witchcraft in my practice. I make oils and herb blends and teas and really work with plant spirit as a part of connecting to the land. I grow a lot of my own so that I can do that in a more like ethical and eco-friendly way. Try not to bring too many non-native plants in, but still. And then I would say a significant amount of my daily practice is also rooted in hearth witchcraft. So offering witchcraft practices to my family and loved ones as a way of support and I don't know, tending to the people and place that I love. So I don't know, it's again very maximalist, and but like Jessica, there is a rootedness in daily practice, and then the other things come as the cycles flow. So I try to stay fluid in that. Thank you.
Thanks, Michelle. Julia?
Yeah, I would say that my belief in witchcraft informs a lot of little things that I do during the day. I've been trying desperately to have a daily practice in the mornings, but it gets blown out of water so often. I feel a bit bereft when I don't have time. At least once a day, I sit a little bit at my altar. Sometimes I draw an oracle card. Sometimes I meditate. I always light a candle, and I don't like burning herbs or anything, but I love burning stuff. So I use essential oils, and one of those, like, you know how they were very popular when I was young, in those water-based essential oil burner with a candle underneath. And I have pictures of Germanic goddesses there. On Fridays, I put a picture of Freya up. I'm an animist. I don't believe in individual goddesses. It's a way of honoring the ancestors in a way. the people, because what I learned when I looked more into Christianization of this area is that it was very painful, it was very brutal here. And I've got pictures of some of the Germanic goddesses, just a way of connecting back to what happened. I travel a lot, and I believe in the spirit or the energy of a place. Like I seek out places in nature that have a special feel, but also any kind of religious, spiritual place. Like I will walk into any church, I'll walk into any mosque. I live next to the place, today's the 9th of November, the day of the November pogroms in Germany. And I live next to the place where the synagogue was burned. It's still a place with a memorial. It's empty space with a memorial. And I go there and I try to connect and feel the energy. And I don't know what it is that we feel. Is it God? Is it the thought and the prayers of the people that were there? Is it whatever people did there? Is it nature spirits? Is it the fae? That we can feel in various places, but you can feel something. Like when you sit there still and you try to connect, you can feel something. And I have got a kitchen altar, and so when I love cooking, so when I cook, I place my ingredients at least on the altar, and say thank you for what I've got from nature. Sometimes if I feel to do a little something, like I needed some extra support, some protection, whatever it is, I may have a little knife just for magical purposes. I maybe put a sigil into a vegetable. And so it's quite interesting. Michelle calls it being a maximalist. It's just the way that this life philosophy practice, is it a religion? I don't know, whatever we call it, informs so many little things that we do. So I don't have much time for big rituals, although I love big rituals because, as other people have mentioned, I also come from a Catholic background and I love the full thing. I've got altar bells, I love gongs, I love the incense bit. I like quite dramatic ritual, but I don't have much time for it. My daughter, she is involved. It was never a conscious decision to involve her. Like in my ideal world, I would be in a coven, but I don't have a babysitter, so she had to just walk in and out, and that's why she knows, she's familiar, she knows what happens. But yeah, I go sometimes a very long time without doing any spell work or whatever, but still there are these little things. How we connect to nature, how we interact with the world, these little things that we do, really. That's a day-to-day practice.
Thanks, Julia. Rex?
Yes, I actually echo a lot of what other folks are saying. There's a lot of little ways that I will integrate, daily. It's a lot of daily activities, and I think that I've also actually studied with Obot. I finished the Bardic grade with them, and that idea of everything is sacred is really one that sits with me pretty solidly. There's a few beliefs that I'm like, I have this one all the time, but that's one that sits with me all the time. And whether that's God or energy or whatever we want to call it, it's still that connection. So I do a lot of little things of like putting sigils and things. I love to use runes. I have, a collection. I love pop tarot, so like really like pop art, like like when there's tarot decks of like I've got like a Hocus Pocus one and the Science Tarot and like a zombie deck and Nightmare Before Christmas and like I think that a lot of pop imagery and stuff is just modern mythology. It's our way of telling each other the same stories that people have been telling each other for generations and generations. My favorite deck right now happens to be the Crow Tarot, and that's just because they just keep showing up. Honestly, they keep showing up on the land around me, and we actually live. We're up on top of a hill, and we're just over the hill from a place called Hawk Ridge, and it's a bird sanctuary where people will come, and it's a really good viewing spot for seeing hawks, seeing all of the different like eagles and things like that we get in this area. And yeah, we just get a lot of crows right now, so I'm like, the Crow Tarot is this is the time for that. I kind of took my witch work into my career path. Sorry, my eye is there's something in my eye. So if I'm blinking a lot, that's why. Um, through that interreligious chaplaincy piece, because I do death work, I do hospice work, so it's a lot of one of my skills is being able to just sit with people wherever they're at, whether it's, grief or fear or, whatever it is, just being able to sit with people through whatever they're going through. Not being judgmental and not trying to fix it, because there's a lot of ways that we try to make people feel better, but what we need to do is just let people feel things. And so I really hear you, Michelle, talking about sort of that more gritty side of Appalachian magic, because it's also in that sort of Polish thread as well for me. Death was not a topic that we shied away from. It was everyday life, and especially coming from camps and things like that. With my grandparents, it's like it was a very no nonsense family, when it came to death and dying and struggle. Excuse me. Sorry, I think my allergies just totally flared up on me. Uh, yeah, I think those are my main things. My favorite tool, I mean, I love ritual tools, brooms and knives and all of the things. Um, it changes, honestly, day to day or week to week, depending on what kind of work I'm doing. Like, I also have like the rosary that my partner brought to me from Italy when they were visiting there, that came from a sanctuary for trans people. There's a place where every year there's this. It used to be a temple to Cibele, which has been, you know, they've put like a Catholic church over top of it, but there is still worship of Cibele and sort of like the Black Madonna and the goddess through that sort of Catholic work, and so that's where my rosary came from. And so I do work with that rosary a lot. I work with a lot of different tools. Honestly, the thing that keeps popping up for me right now is actually technology. So like when I was watching Buffy many moons ago when I was like in high school, and the teacher Jenny Calendar came on and is like, "Oh, I'm a techno pagan." I was like, "That's it. I am a techno pagan. That is amazing." This is in the early days of like Witch Fox and things like that. It's a lot of times like you'd have to like go to, Barnes and Noble and like find your little witchy, your four witchy magazines. And sometimes we'd get the ones from the UK. Um, and technology just sort of opened up such an expansive world, right? And there's a lot of crap on it, but there's also a lot of amazing things, ways to connect with people, find events, find people. So honestly, I think that the internet, that literal web of connection that we've built, is probably my favorite tool.
Thank you. Moonbeams?
So I too do a daily practice. Um, I also, besides Kindreds, I also do Molly Ringer's 30 Day of Goddess, and she has a word for every day. And that's all I do from that practice. I take the word and I write the definition, and I do a little journal entry about how that applies kind of to my life or to where I'm going. So that kind of keeps you grounded. I do pull a daily, either a tarot card or an oracle card or a rune card, and do just a little couple of sentence journaling about that. I do candle meditation for 5 minutes just to get me. I might be a little hyper, so it kind of gets me grounded for the day, so that at least I start on an even keel. I may not end on an even keel, but I do start on an even keel. And I also take a little walk around the neighborhood and just look for what's changed from yesterday. What are the trees doing? What are the flowers doing? What are the animals doing? Um, just to to keep me grounded and keep me even in my spiritual practice and in my daily life. I do have an altar. I actually have 2 altars. The one with the candles behind me, I have a year-round ancestors altar because I often ask my ancestors for guidance, and they generally show up when I need it. The other is just a general altar of nature. I have candle there that I use for my candle meditation. But it's things that I've picked up on walks all of my life. It's a very cluttered altar. It's got shells and rocks and sticks and feathers and things like that. But that's where I do my morning candle meditation. But it's your practice is what you make it. When I need, and I do things during the day too. When I get stuck on a question, I pull out the pendulum and ask for advice on that, for different questions. And my one big practice, it's not really a ritual, but I administer a food program for the food insecure, and that is like my weekly way to give to my community as part of my personal practice. And I've always used food as a way to show my love for my community and my family. And so that's a really big thing. That's it's like 10 hours a week that I have work on that. And it makes me humble, and it fills me with love too. So that's what I do for as a witchy druid.
Thank you. All right, we're at time. So I don't know if any of you have additional time available to finish this out, or okay, we just have a couple more questions. And then I'd like you to be able to share any of your offerings, if you have any that you'd like to share in terms of, your own shop or your own practices. So the next question, though, is if you are in a coven or another witchy group, what is that like? And what is the most important suggestion you could give someone considering that option? And if you're solitary and not with the group, same questions. So, Jessica?
Oh, there it has unmuted. I am a solitary, and I have had a few experiences of like working in, not in a coven, but I have had experiences of doing some sort of rituals with other people. But I tend to prefer to work by myself, for all sorts of reasons, really. But so I don't feel very well qualified to answer this question, because I think it's just one of those things that people, like, some people do like to work solid. Like, I think everyone who's in a coven also does some solitary, has a solitary practice as well. But I think it's just my whole framework of what I do, that I don't see it as something that I do in the company of other people necessarily. Like the people, the persons that I am working with are not human persons, so I don't see that I am solitary as in I'm on my own. I'm not. But yeah, my magic just doesn't is not the sort of magic that you do in a group of people, I suppose. I'm not sure if that answers the question or not. So what do I suggest for solitaries? I think what I suggest for everybody really is like really just learning your own, like learning to listen to your own intuition, because whether you're going to work with other people or to be honest, I think everyone should work by themselves maybe first, at least a little bit. What I tend to see, especially now that like we do have the internet, which is amazing and is so good that we can kind of connect with people all over the place, but I do see a lot of people very keen to almost like be spoon-fed a little bit, like when they're starting off, because especially if they're leaving established religion and they're so used to people giving them like a framework. It's like, you do this, we do this on this day. And so people are just like hungry for that. They're hungry for direction and they're hungry for rules, really, I think. And that's no shade on them at all, because like that is because that's the way we're kind of like groomed to be as humans now, you know, in order to kind of like fit into the way that of the, you know, the way the world works. And in our capitalist culture, is like we're supposed to just like go along with what everyone else does. And so it's just really alien to people to kind of have to listen to their intuition and to like carve out their own path. And that, so like that would be my advice to anyone who wants to start on their path, whether it is solitary or whether they're going to like combine solitary and coven work, is to learn to trust yourself and learn to like recognize that ping that you get when something is true for you, you know, because then you'll be able to have discernment. You'll be able to kind of like filter out some of the, I mean, and there is a lot of like kind of weird, some of it's even like lots of the early witchcraft books and stuff were made up, a lot of it, you know. So yeah, I think learning to trust yourself is really important in that context, and not looking for somebody to kind of give you answers from the outside. I think it's very important, whatever your path, to do that. But I suppose if you are somebody who does enjoy co-creating with other people, like specifically people rather than spirits, then maybe coven work would be a better fit for you. Yeah, giving you that kind of structure, I suppose, as well, if you're not completely happy with giving that structure for yourself. Yeah.
Thank you. Michelle?
So I do participate in a witchy group, like I mentioned before, but the anchor of my practice is solitary. I also participate in Jessica and the Moon group, which I'm sure she'll hopefully share with the group at the end about offerings. But I also participate in Molly Reamer's group. Is it 30 Days of Goddess, I think, is her official program. But I'm one of her Patreons. So I use those spaces as a way to connect with other practitioners. And as I said, I do enjoy the circles and the things like that. And that is a component of what our local group does. But our local group started out as just me showing up to an event at the local shop, liking the folks that seem to also be pretty committed to their practice, and texting them and saying, are there any groups? I don't think there are any groups. Do you want to hang out and talk about this stuff? Because I have nobody to talk to about this stuff. And it's not that we're looking to learn or bounce our practices off each other in a way of like a coven, a learning coven, or even a coven that has a purpose like for specific ritual or practice. But it was more about finding ways to connect with other people when we don't have very many outlets to share our practices with others, or talk about the way the greater culture impacts our practice or ability to practice it. As others have mentioned today, there are a lot of us in the community that are neurodivergent or have other physical, mental, or otherwise differences that make it hard to connect with people who aren't like us. We don't necessarily speak or think in the same way. And having a safe place to be ourselves with as few masks as possible is really important. And so that is why I asked if they would like to create a group. And so we meet, like I mentioned before, for some of the Sabbats. We there's a local moon group that I participate in, and so we gather for those as well. I don't facilitate that one, but I think, like a lot of pagan and witchy spaces, it's lovely when I get as much out of it, whether I'm facilitating or not. And so for me, enjoying the way that other people create safe and sacred space is really important. Especially because I think the one thing that I try to work through as a solitary practitioner is not getting stuck in my own gnosis. And so being around others allows me to challenge my beliefs in a way that in the Christian household I was brought up in, questions weren't welcomed. And so being able to really constantly be asking myself deep, good, heartfelt questions about my practice and beliefs is one of the many benefits I see of being in a group like that. And so the suggestion I would give to someone else considering that option is, one, first and foremost, with any witchcraft practice, I say safety is first. Make sure that you are not showing up to a group where you don't know anybody in a dark park at night. Like, that's not safe. Use practical common sense. And then second of all, as much as possible, whether it's online or in person, making sure that you're not necessarily vetting in like a harsh or critical way, but just asking important questions. Do your beliefs align? Are they open to differences? I think it's a big red flag anytime you join a group. If it's like, well, this one person leads it and this is the way we all believe, and we all do it this way. And I'm using air quotes because that to me is like a very rigid way of thinking, that whether it's an organized religion or a pagan path that's not official or anything like that, anytime somebody's saying this is the way it has to be done, that's a red flag for cultish behavior, controlling, narcissistic leadership, etc. And I think that should be a red flag to anybody getting into group work. Like, use your common sense and seek out like the truth of the folks. If you ask good questions, they'll usually tell you something that will illuminate whether or not it's a safe environment for you. And especially within the pagan and witchy groups, I think that's really important. Whatever your particular differences are, you want to make sure that those people are going to honor and respect you as you show up in that circle. And if it's not a safe space, I think good questions will vet that out of people. Because we usually tell on ourselves as humans. And I think the last thing I would say, especially if it's an online group, is just protecting your own cybersecurity. So not giving over too much information about where you live, or making sure that you're participating in a way that's safe for your real life as well. Especially if you live by yourself, or you have children, or anything else that would jeopardize your safety in the real world. But I think there are a lot of benefits of working in a coven or a group. And so I think the first step is always self-exploration. Like, why do you want it? What do you hope to get out of it? And if you're going to participate in the group, what are you going to contribute? Like, don't show up just to consume. I think that's a big issue in any organized group, of like, you can't just show up and take and not from a loving place offer something back. Because then you're not really participating. You're an audience member. And I think the craft is always, for everyone who's really doing it, it's action. Whether it's internal action or external action, you can't armchair it. You can't phone it in. And that goes to groups as well.
Thanks, Michelle. Julia?
Yeah, as I said, I'm a solitary witch more or less by out of necessity, because I have a child and I have no childcare. And also, like, here in Germany, I don't think there are that many witchcraft groups around. Like, most people, if you say something witch, they think of the children's characters or of the characters in folklore, really. Most people don't know it as a kind of as what we're talking about, a philosophy, a way of life. But nevertheless, I really love community, and I would say anyone who sets out as a solitary practitioner to also try and experience that. There are several online witchcraft communities who offer online rituals. Like, I have seen some through Reclaiming, Starhawk. There's the what's their name again? the church around Selena Fox, they offer rituals on YouTube. You can watch their full moon rituals, right?
Circle Sanctuary, yeah.
Yes, Circle Sanctuary. Then, I've tried to do my own with a few people. My daughter's really keen on trying that again, real life, in-person rituals around the holidays with people here. And she's suggesting her friends from school, and I'm like, no, rather not. Because, drawing in mariners is a bit difficult. And I've been to Glastonbury Goddess Temple and participated there. And so, yeah, I think, it's nice to experience that side of it as well, and see what other people do, and see whether it's for you. It can be really inspiring in a good way that you draw something out of it. You can also think, oh no, this is definitely what I don't want, because witchcraft, first and foremost, as both Jessica and Michelle said, it's about self-study. You have to really find out what resonates with you and what suits you. As I understand, even if you join like a Gardnerian coven, they give you a long reading list, and they want you to figure out a lot of things by yourself and what resonates with you. And as in the individual practices, even though they may have set coven things that they do in the individual practices, it can look very different. And so in that also, it's really important to be tolerant and be open-minded, because we are talking about personal beliefs here, really. It is not scientific facts. So there are witches who do things that I personally, that are not part of my practice, that I don't believe in. And like one person folkloric witchcraft can be the next person's superstition. We just listen to whatever other people do with respect. And then we decide whether, we just accept it as their thing, or whether we draw inspiration for ourselves. But I feel it's really important not to argue or have big discussions about it, because they're personal beliefs. And I think that whatever gets us through life and helps us answer the questions that science can answer, like why, where are we from, where are we going, what's the point of all this, how can we live life in a peaceful and content way, in harmony with nature and our other human beings. Whatever works for an individual is fine to achieve that. And yes, like Michelle said, if anybody claims they've got the answer, they've got certainty, they've got the facts, run.
Great, thank you. Moonbeams?
So everybody said just about what I would say, but coming from someone who was a solitary practitioner for years and years and years, from mid-20s into late 40s, and then founded an Obod Grove in Tennessee. I'd like to address what a grove or a coven can do for you. They can give you a place to ask questions. Mm-hmm. They can give you a if it's a safe place. Again, if it becomes controlling, or if they have a lot of rules, because remember, they ain't no rules. We're making it up as we go along, right? Then you really want to question them, because yeah, as someone said, that's probably a cult. But my friend and I started a grove. He was into shamanism, and then decided that really wasn't what he wanted to do. And after talking, he took the whole Obod course, and now he has like a doctorate in Celtic religious studies from somewhere in Scotland. Yeah, he's like, all he does is study. He has a lot of degrees. But anyway, we started a grove because people started asking us questions, and it gave a place that people could come together and ask questions and learn. And the grove still exists, even though neither one of us live there. There's a library. They can get books and read. We collected a lot of books. There are videos. We have recordings of meditation. But it is a safe place for people, and it actually became a grove for a lot of different pagan practice people to come together a few times a year, just to have fellowship, because most of us had been or were solitary practitioners. So that is one good thing, a few times a year you can get together, you can do a ritual, you can ask your questions, you can learn. But a solitary practice is very important because they're not going to be there every day, and you're going to want to do something, anything, even if it's just light a candle to start your day, to get yourself spiritually in a good place, to go forth and be fruitful, or do it in the evening. But as building your solitary practice is very important, because you're not always going to be in a place where there is a grove or a coven. I mean, I'm out here on the Oregon coast. The closest group is, well, there's one in Washington, and there's one in very southern Oregon. And so, you need to have that way to sustain yourself. Otherwise, you'll just let your practice peter out, and then you're going to get really frustrated with yourself. That's all.
Thank you, Moonbeams. So I only had one more question, and that was what was missing that we didn't talk about, and or are there any final things that you would like to say? And then after you're done with that, feel free to share any offerings you'd like to share with the group.
I think I'd like to add that, especially if anyone's new to the craft or just this alternative path in general, just to be patient with yourself. It's going to take a while to learn. It's going to feel overwhelming at first. Try to put that aside, because there's so many options, and in so much of our culture, especially if you're an American, you grew up in so many of the things you already know about other religions or cultures and things like that. If you haven't grown up in this, if you didn't grow up with pagan or witch parents, it's going to all be new, and there's going to be so much to learn. So be patient with yourself. And especially if you're engaging with others online or in person, stay humble, stay open, and stay respectful. It's so important. One, because even if you disagree with them, there's something that they can teach you. There's always something to learn, even if it's just that their practice isn't your practice. And I think more importantly, whether we're looking at from like a human standpoint, a spirit standpoint, or just like a practice standpoint, there's more that we have in common than we don't. Most people have some common beliefs that bring them to this space, whether it's the idea that everybody has a right to be different, and it's okay to sit in a room with people totally different from you and just listen and respect them. And that if the only thing that you have in common is that you all respect and honor nature and the earth that we live on, that it can be enough. And I think also that I feel like it's incumbent upon us, in case there are especially young folks who see your recording. This is not Harry Potter. This is not fantastical. Do not expect that like you're going to be able to wave a wand and shoot sparks, or like those sorts of things. And I think that's just an important grounding thing for people to have realistic expectations of what witchcraft can and can't do, and to also acknowledge that it takes a while to learn any practice. So it's okay to be flexible over time if your craft changes and evolves. As most of the folks here have shared, our practice has evolved over years and changed so many times. And so just to be okay that just because you did something in the beginning, if it doesn't work for you anymore or it doesn't align with your current beliefs, that's okay too. Because I think sometimes it's easy as humans just to get stuck and to do what we've always done. So that's all I would just add to that.
Thank you. Root, do you want to share next, please? So that
Sure.
you can go. Yeah.
Yeah, no, I appreciate it. Yeah, I agree with everything that Michelle has said. I think the one thing I would add, in their claiming tradition, there is a phrase, you are your own spiritual authority rooted in community. And there's a couple ways that I interpret that. One, you know best what's, for yourself, what works for you, what doesn't work for you. Your beliefs may change over time, and that is okay. Just go with it. Um, the rooted in community part is important though, because even if we are, if we're working in a prophetic tradition, or if we are working in, if we're getting like downloads from deity and things like that, it is good to check in with the people around you, both within the tradition and without the tradition that are outside of that community. One of the communities I was involved in, really loving people, really great practices, definitely a cult. Looking at it from the outside, and it was years later that we found out that there was all of these other things that were happening in the community that many of us did not know about because we were newer to it. So make sure that you're maintaining connections both within like the witchy community, but outside of the witchy community as much as possible. Because sometimes there's things that we just don't see when we're in it. Oh, is it part of the woo? Is it God is telling me to do this thing? Or is it potentially someone else steering me in a direction that I didn't actually, if I were grounded in touch with my values, is that something I would actually choose to do? So I just highly recommend. But yeah, I appreciate the space and the time. I will just say really quickly before I jump off, my website is rootholden.com. I'm the only one with that name that I've found so far, so it's pretty easy to find me. I'm building a spiritual care practice, and I'm particularly focusing on basically queer folks and pagans, and that crossover is my favorite. Working with queer pagans and disabled folks are kind of is my niche. But yeah, I'm happy to work with people, and honestly, I've kind of been around the block with different traditions, and so I'm happy to talk to folks that are like kind of exploring and figuring out where they want to land. But yeah, thank you all so much. I appreciate it.
Thank you, Root. Thanks for coming. Moonbeams?
Yeah, what Michelle said, what Ruth said, but also start small, start slow. Don't try to take on too much in the beginning, or you will get frustrated. And, and if something's not working, don't try to fix it. Pick something different but similar enough that it will keep you rooted in your practice. But, Rome wasn't built in a day, and neither were those of us who have been practicing for, okay, I'm going to give you my age. I started practicing Druidry in my late 20s, and I'm in my very late 60s now. Okay, so 40 years I've been doing this, and my practice still changes. I change things all the time because maybe something is not working the way I need it to work for me, and adapt it. But yeah, just don't go out there gangbangers and like buy all the candles and all the crystals and all the things and all the books, and then go, I can't do this. I can't do this. Pick something. Do a meditation first, or you know, do a an almond walk a couple of times a week or something. Start small and add to your practice. And if it's not working, dump it and get something that works better for you. It's not written in stone.
Thank you. Do you have anything that you would like to share with the audience in terms of offerings, like a website or a YouTube channel or Etsy store, or any kind of like craft work that you do that you'd like to share?
I am the laziest druid witch you would ever meet. I wrote, if anybody ever wants to talk about druidry or incorporating witchcraft and druidry, I would be glad to talk to them. I am on Molly Rimmer's group. I am on the Kindred's group. I'm on a Hedge Witch group, and I will be glad to talk to you about what that really does look like. And it's different every week depending on how I'm feeling. Sometimes I'm witchier than I am druidy, and sometimes I'm more druidy than I am witchy, and sometimes I'm just not either. And I sit down and I'll pull out my shaman cards and go, this is my practice for today. So
Thank you. Anyone else like to share anything else, or does anybody have any questions?
Before we move on from this, I'd like to share a couple of things. First of all, since she had to leave a little early, so that it's in the recording, Jessica's group, she has a YouTube channel, a website, all of the things, Jessica and the Moon, and she has a Patreon for the, is it still through, yeah, I think it's there, or it's through her website now, jessicaandthemoon.com, where you could join the Jessica and the Moon Moonwise group. So I just wanted to mention that Jessica gave so much lovely information, and she has a wonderful group. Many of those of us today are part of that group in some capacity. So I just wanted to plug and share her information. She also has astrology and tarot offerings on her website as well. So I wanted to make sure to share her information, and you can learn more about it in her own voice from her website. So please check that out. And then I do tarot readings for others. So my handle is Winds of Wisdom Tarot on Instagram. That's the best way to connect with me if you're interested in a tarot reading. I also do private life coaching. So if anybody's interested in that, but I also just wanted to say, I think in terms of offerings and things like that, the witchcraft community is usually very sharing and open and lovely in that way. So if you connect with some of us there, there's usually a way to find the rest of us if you lose this information from the recording. So if you can't find me directly, Carol knows how to get a hold of me.
Any questions at all from anyone? Or anyone else want to share anything else? If not, I will be sharing the workbook, and which will include all of the resources for all of the different things. This is kind of a teaser for the Drumlin Pagan Learning Group that I'm creating online. And I'll also be sharing the recording for this event. So along with that, so in all of the places that you may have seen this. So thank you so much for attending. If you could please fill out the survey for this event. After you leave, it'll pop up on your screen. Otherwise, thanks for sharing that, Michelle, because was trying to look for it online on Instagram, but I don't think I heard you say the whole thing. So I appreciate that you shared that. And then what else was I gonna say? Yeah, I also put the link to the survey in the chat too, if you want to look for it. Let me see if I can grab it again to share it again for you. It's going to help me a lot to get your feedback. So, and I don't take any of that personal. So just make you be aware of that. It just really helps me to know if people have advice. So, all right. Thank you so much for attending. I so appreciate it. And I'm going to stop recording in case anyone wants to talk without being recorded.